They don't count towards quorum anyhow. But he doesn't count towards quorum anyhow.
Or here. Oh, well.
I have 6:30. I'm going to start the webinar. Yep.
Yeah, I still I've got this. I wasn't sure they were trying to yeah. I will
Okay, hi everybody. We are still waiting for quorum. So with that, I'm just going to let you know where you are. So it's our joint committee meeting for transportation and the Economic Development and Small Business Committee. We have two presentations tonight in person. We have Department of City Planning, so Juki here to talk about the New York City Industrial Plan. I believe has a presentation that will be walked through, maybe some of their colleagues. And then we also have in person one and a few other colleagues that are here, but Rose is represented as well. And this is the 2.0 and special purpose district. We want to be able to hit quorum by doing so in person, so that if we want to take any resolutions or votes, we can do that. We need to get quorum in person. So I know folks might be online, but we appreciate that you're here, but that is a limitation that we have. So folks are going to be still coming into the room. We'll do attendance for transportation, and then we'll do for the Economic Development and Small Business Committee. I should introduce myself. I'm Katie Walsh, I'm the committee chair, and Dr. Cooper is the vice chair for transportation, and Damaris is the chair for Economic Development and Small Business Committee. Before we turn to roll call for the committees, Damaris, if you would start to open up before we jump in. Okay, great, excellent. All right, so Jeremy, over to you for roll.
Sure, we're going to call two committees. You may be called twice if you are on both committees. Please acknowledge your name both times. If you are joining us on Zoom, please remember to unmute yourself, acknowledge your name, and mute yourself again. Folks who are joining us on Zoom, you do not count towards quorum. We're going to start with the Economic Development and Small Business Committee. Damaris Santiago. Thank you. Diana Aguilar. Joan Body, George Cardona, Esteban Chavez, Hector Gonzalez, Nicholas Jackson, Jeremy Kaplan, Antoinette Martinez, Michael Pepin, Karen Roman.
Here.
Thank you. We do not have a quorum. We will move on. This is Transportation Committee, Katie Walsh. Thank you. John DeLuca.
Here.
Thank you. Joan Body. George Cardona. Jerry Chan. Thank you. Danny DeVera. Pino Morales Escamilla.
Here.
Thank
Here.
you. Thank you. You do not count towards quorum. Matthew Forkowitz. Thank you. Jamie Freed. Daniel Kaminsky. Thank you. Roberto A. Martinez. Maria Roca. Sam Sierra. Faye Walker.
Here.
Thank you. Transportation does have a quorum.
Great, thank you. And so that means if we want to go ahead in the Transportation Committee, with input from our colleagues, of course, we can take any, votes and resolutions that we want. I do want to say that, it's always a great opportunity to do a joint meeting on topics that are very important to the district. And I know at the end, we might have additional kind of comments for either one of the committees, but just to start out, just to recognize that another committee member has come in. Just to say that the New York City Industrial Plan, from in a few minutes, you'll take us through the timelines, but it is critically important to this district and to the park and the waterfront, but all parts of Community Board 7, and it has implications for transportation, for economic development, as well as things like housing and a lot of other opportunities and problems and challenges of this district. So we want to take the time to do this and through a joint committee, we'll get a presentation. Let's ask questions. If we are so moved, we might choose to have a resolution, if it seems appropriate, that we can then bring to the full community board meeting, which is on Wednesday, February 25th, not the third Wednesday as usual. It's been February 25th. So with that, I can invite Juki up. You've been here before, but introduce yourself then.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Juki Sai. I'm at the Department of City Planning, Brooklyn office. I'm the liaison for Sunset Park and Windsor Terrace, Community Board 7. And I'm here tonight with my colleague Andrew Jones, who's the Deputy Director of our Department of Economic Development and Regional Planning, EDR, who's going to be our primary point person walking through the presentation tonight. I will be here as well with Andrew. And I think we're going to hold questions until the end. So anything else, Andrew, before I hand it over to you? All right, great. Thanks so much for having us out. I'm looking forward to the presentation.
Said that Deputy Director of EDR.
And you see quite closely to the mic so that
I appreciate it. I was also one of the colleagues on industrial plans, business plan, and I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have. So tonight I'm going to provide a brief first an overview of what the industrial plan is, how it came into being, context like slides on the state of the city's industrial economy, also Seven's industrial economy, and then over goals, strategies, and recommendations that were included in the plan, which was released at the end of 2025 per select council legislation that's probably not planned out in the first place. So congratulations. Okay. All right, so what is the New York City industrial plan? So in 2023, City Council passed Local Law 172, I believe by unanimous margin, which required the Department of City Planning, Department of Small Business Services, and Economic Development Corporation to prepare an industrial development strategic plan. And so what that entailed essentially was extensive research that assessed state of the city's industrial economy through quantitative and geospatial means, but also through extensive engagement with industrial stakeholders, community members of industrial areas and the like. Required us to identify these things called primary industrial areas, which are essentially legislative terminology for how to classify industrial areas within the city. And then to develop a series of recommendations for policies, investments, programs, and the like that can promote the kind of growth of the city's industrial economy, both on a citywide scale and at local levels as well. So while FBS and EPA were the three agencies named in the local law 172 legislation, there were over a dozen citywide agencies and mayor's offices who were involved in the plan's development. This was well and truly interagency initiative. So as I noted, there was a pretty substantial amount of that underpins the plan. We opened and collected responses for an industrial survey, two-year planning process, over 600 responses, included industrial business owners, workers of industrial businesses, and residents who live kind of in and around industrial areas. We spend a significant amount of time on the ground in industrial areas, just kind of operate or observing how these places operate and talking to the folks we encounter. We actually came to Community District 7 twice over the course of the planning process for the smart stores. And then we also have 5 town halls, each borough, where folks could ask us questions about the draft plan, provide their input on a myriad of industrial issues, and then really just tell us what issues are their business, their community, and the like. So the plan is structured around 5 kind of challenge areas, which you can see. I'll go into each of those in greater detail with the presentation. But it starts with this kind of industry 101 section. Kind of the history of the city's industrial economy, some analysis of those survey results and what they tell us about how industrial stakeholders within the city are kind of thinking and feeling, and some other kind of essential context setting information. It includes maps of those primary industrial areas, the reason why designated industrial areas, we kind of broadened the PIA mandate, is kind of broader industrial land use framework, which we're going to greater detail in a few slides, and then strategic planning area profiles, which were also requirements of local law 172. It basically divided the city into 10 different kind of sub-city planning geographies that really try to get us to think about more localized planning and analysis of the industrial economy. We also built out this tool called the Industrial Data Explorer. So there's, as I mentioned, there's a ton of quantitative and geospatial research that went into this plan. Much of it is pretty dense. We wanted to create an accessible, usable web mapping tool that would allow members of the public like yourself to dig into some of this research and understand kind of what the industrial economy looks like in your communities. Thanks. Yeah. So before diving into some details on the plan's goals, strategies, and recommendations, I want to provide kind of a brief overview of New York City's industrial economy to kind of understand like the facts and planning base that underpin the plan. So today, New York City contains about 550,000 industrial jobs. This accounts for about 15% of the city's total workforce. When people think, industrial jobs, right, they think of workers in factories. But in reality, the contemporary industrial economy is significantly more multifaceted. So we came up with this fairly simple, like 3-part classification for how to understand the industrial economy. There are businesses and workers who make things. This includes, traditional manufacturing establishments, but also includes construction firms and production firms. There are businesses who move things, right? So think transportation, warehousing, logistics, but also folks who work in passenger transportation as well. And then there are businesses and workers who maintain things, so utilities, waste management, and the like. So we look at kind of segments of the industrial economy over the course of the last 20 years. A few kind of key patterns start to emerge. The first is that the city lost a substantial number of manufacturing jobs, and this kind of continues downward trend that really started in the middle of the 20th century as industrial businesses started to expand for the suburbs, the Sun Belt, and increasingly internationally in the latter decades of the 20th century. By contrast, transportation, logistics, and construction, which are in that making field, have really accounted for the lion's share of the city's recent industrial job growth. And then on the right-hand side, even though the bars aren't super visible, as the city's population has grown over the course of the last 2 decades, so has demand for essential services such as waste management, utilities, and the like. So what kinds of buildings support the city's industrial base? So approximately 80% of the industrial building stock consists of small single-story warehouses that are under 20,000 square feet. And so that's the bar you see on the leftmost side, the red bar over there. So there's about 12,000 industrial buildings in the city, about 10,000 of them are under 20,000 square feet. The blue bars represent kind of total building area. So large buildings, while representing a small number of our industrial buildings, represent a very large share of our industrial floor area. It's also worth noting that a pretty substantial portion of industrial activity in the city does not take place within buildings at all, right? They operate their own kind of open industrial jobs, is what we refer to them as. And that's jobs that take place on construction job sites, or on kind of the open expanses of ports, rail yards, and that sort. So approximately this chart shows the volume of industrial development that has occurred over each decade, I believe, going back to the early 1900s. So about 70% of the city's industrial development was built before 1960. As you can see, industrial development has slowed really substantially over the course of the last 20, 30 years. And each of those bars represents those size categories that you saw on the last slide. So pretty much all of the new industrial development today consists of large warehouses. But the fact that our building stock is so old means that it's often not well suited to the needs of modern industrial businesses, right? Inadequate loading capacity, inadequate power, water, and another infrastructure. And that makes it difficult for us to retain existing industrial businesses that want to kind of adapt to the modern economy as well. So Manhattan has traditionally been the hub of the city's industrial economy. We've seen some decentralization and kind of diffusion of the city's industrial job base over the course of the last really 15 years. Manhattan still, per our data, has actually the most industrial jobs. But this general trend towards like diffusion and decentralization to continue. Lastly, despite some of these that I've alluded to in the last few slides, New York still boasts one of the strongest kind of metropolitan industrial economies of anywhere in the country. Our industrial employment base, industrial building stock, really dwarf those of our regional counterparts and are pretty competitive with other metros like Los Angeles that are much geographically larger than ours. So again, as I mentioned, the Industrial Data Explorer tool really allowed us to zoom in on and better understand local industrial economies throughout the city. So I wanted to use the opportunity to provide you all with some quick data points that offer a basic understanding of Community 47's industrial economy at a fairly high level. So this is a map that depicts the distribution of different types of jobs across the community district. Each job on this map, it's hard to read that, legend represents about 4 jobs. So the purple represents industrial jobs, which consists of the jobs and businesses I mentioned a few slides back. The yellow represents what we call institutional jobs, so that's healthcare, education, government, things of that nature. The blue represents office jobs, and the green represents local services jobs, so think food services, accommodation, retail trade, things of that nature. Community District 7 has approximately 10,000 industrial jobs, which represents about 16% of its total employment base, making it about as more industrially intensive in the city. So this is the same map where we just labeled a few of the key clusters that we saw when looking at So there's a substantial number of industrial jobs at Industry City, for office jobs and kind of local services jobs. Pretty solid cluster at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, as well as the 65th Street Rail Yard, immediately south of it, which is the terminus of the Cross Harbor floating freight rail operation. And then there's also a pretty significant cluster on 54 at the end of 54th Street, where it looks like there's kind of a small cluster of like cold storage and food distribution as well. So nearly 1,000 acres within Community District 7 is zoned for manufacturing. This represents about 35% of the district's total land area. It's worth noting that a substantial share of the district's manufacturing zone area consists of what are known as M1D districts. M1D districts are a unique type of manufacturing district that allows both residential in certain circumstances and industrial uses. So Community District 7 has a substantial amount of what we call industrial enabling infrastructure. So that freight rail, ports, truck routes, both local truck routes and truck routes. As I know, it's home to one of the city's two what we call intermodal facilities where things move between rail and maritime. But the blue shape you see there represents the 1% annual chance floodplain. So all of these assets are both critical and extremely vulnerable to potentious climate threats. So the plan's first goal is to enable industrial businesses to evolve, innovate, and transition to green technologies. In 1961, when the latest zoning resolution was adopted, there were about 1 million manufacturing jobs here in New York City, and they accounted for about 50% of total private employment. The city is probably, common knowledge to you all, is no longer the global manufacturing hub it once was. The chart on a few slides back shows that there are about 57,000 manufacturing jobs in the city. The diversification of the city's industrial economy is really positive. A lot of industrial jobs here in the city. At the same time, I think it's hard to just fact the kind of regulations that we have for how we govern the industrial economy, the tools we have for supporting it are terribly out of date. We also anticipate that the industrial economy will transform still as the city starts to undertake measures to decarbonize its economy. The Green Economy Action Plan, which BBC published a few years ago, estimated that about 300,000 new industrial jobs could be created through the implementation of Local Law 97 of the climate legislation. So in these slides, I'm just going to provide a flavor of some of the strategies and recommendations that the plan included. There were about 72 recommendations in total. I'd like to emphasize recommendations, right? These are fairly preliminary ideas for different policy interventions, investments, and the like. We can talk more about the kind of next steps and the implementations and so firstly, improving city government's ability to help industrial businesses. The city has a variety of programs that provide technical assistance to industrial businesses, primarily aimed at helping them access resources and navigate regulatory challenges. The city is in the process of exploring ways to enhance a lot of these programs in response to things like Local Law 97, as well as mayoral directives around cutting red tape, which the new mayor has spoken quite extensively about, but we're also facets of the prior mayor's policy agenda as well. Activate industrial sites in support of the green transition. The city's industrial are extremely well suited to support the development of renewable energy and other climate infrastructure. We think that's a really untapped opportunity. The city is committed to installing climate infrastructure on all city-owned property by 2035. And so that's a commitment that the industrial plan the city is also exploring measures that it can take to encourage developers to cite renewable energy infrastructure along with their industrial development projects. And lastly, the city is working to convene different industrial businesses to better understand their waste streams and to figure out if there are opportunities to kind of capture some of those waste streams and enable those materials to be recovered, reused in a productive way. So use city owned assets to grow industrial businesses. More than a quarter all of the industrially zoned land in the city is owned by the city. These assets include some of these large campuses that are some of the densest clusters of industrial employment anywhere in New York. You all have one of them right here in Community District 7 with the Brooklyn Army Terminal. Capital Development Corporation and among others thinking about ways that they can really optimize these campuses as locations for industrial employment. The city, as some of you may know, offers a series of tax incentives for industrial businesses. However, the rates of uptake for a lot of these tax programs are extremely low. So over the course of the plan's research and engagement, we were told about some of the kind of eligibility criteria or limitations on how some of these tax credits can be used that make industrial businesses unlikely to use them. And so one of our recommendations was to form a task force that can explore and move some changes and figure out how we can. Lastly, sorry, no worries. So lastly, the city is increasingly incorporating the hiring WB procurement goals into lots of different capital projects. EC specifically is exploring how they can incorporate these into all of their construction procurement and their other industrial services programs as well. So the plan's second goal is to advance land and real estate strategy. As I mentioned, New York City's industrial building stock primarily consists of these smaller, older buildings that aren't well suited for modern industrial businesses. As I mentioned, the city's kind of current manufacturing land use regulations were developed in the 60s when city government was trying to kind of enable manufacturing districts to compete with these greenfield sites in the suburbs. So they really, zoning regulations trying to enable extremely low density auto-centric development, which is really not the name of the modern industrial economy. These regulations make it pretty costly and difficult to build modern new industrial space. There are also only so many places within the city where industrial businesses can site. And so their kind of supply squeeze is starting to cause industrial rents to rise for the first couple of decades. So the first and kind of most essential strategy within this goal is the establishment of this new industrial land use framework that we think could help guide future development investment in manufacturing areas. So as I mentioned, local law 72 required the industrial plan to identify these primary industrial areas. And they gave us a series of criteria that they want us to use when identifying these areas. So primary industrial areas should be significant clusters of industrially zoned land. They should have large lot sizes that are well suited to accommodate industrial operations. And they should be near some of that industrially enabling infrastructure that, right? So maritime, rail, truck routes, and things of that nature. And so as we were undertaking this exercise, identifying these primary industrial areas during the planning process, City Guest for Economic Opportunity was adopted. And I don't know how familiar folks are with this, but City Guest for Economic Opportunity created 3 new types of manufacturing districts. One of which was called the M3A Core District, which essentially limited any non-industrial use, right? So size caps on community facilities, size caps on various types of commercial uses. Second type were transition districts. This broad mix of industrial and commercial uses, but it also had some measures that tried to incentivize the inclusion of industrial and any mixed commercial and industrial development. The third were M1A group districts, which allowed kind of similar mix of uses to the M2A districts, sought to encourage higher density development that could fit more seamlessly with commercial and even residential uses nearby. So as a result, we kind of opted to pursue this sort of 3-part framework, an industrial land use framework. So we identified primary industrial areas, which again were required by local law 172. These represent areas that are currently very heavily industrial, and city policies should aim to maintain these as heavy industrial areas. Mapping of some of those M3A core districts that were created through City Guest for Economic Opportunity. We also started designated secondary industrial areas, which are a little bit harder to see on this map. In yellow, these are mixed job centers, right? That contain a pretty substantial volume of both industrial and commercial uses. And the city should support that general mixing, again, potentially through the mapping of those M2A transition districts. And then the green areas are what we call neighborhood industrial areas. So these are manufacturing districts where industrial operations are extremely close to residences and transit, and should be safely integrated with these other uses to the greatest extent possible. Again, potentially through mapping these M1A growth districts or other districts that kind of accommodate light industrial in a fully mixed context. I should note these designations are not zoning changes themselves, right? These are just like recommendations that could inform future zoning changes or like future land use policy decisions from the city.
That's our doorbell. It's unlocked.
All right, so this is a designated industrial area framework looks like in Union District 7. There are about 450 acres of primary industrial area designated land. It's the largest of any of those three categories I just went through. Mostly it's concentrated along the pretty heavy industrial front. There are approximately 150 acres, secondary industrial area designated lands. Some of those mixed job centers, right, industry city, and one along some of the rail lines. And then there are 370 acres of neighborhood industrial areas. That mostly includes some of those M1D districts that I mentioned earlier. We believe that residential is not appropriate in the primary or secondary industrial areas. So that's why I thought I wanted to start that they did. So this goal will also include other strategies that sought to kind of make it easier to develop new modern industrial spaces. As I mentioned, the 1961 zoning resolution included extremely high parking and loading requirements that just aren't consistent with the types of spaces that the most modern industrial developers would bring about. And they make a lot of projects spatially infeasible. The image on the right kind of illustrates what I'm talking about in a bit greater detail. Secondly, industrial operations have gotten cleaner and safer to locate in building. I think residential due to technological improvements and best practices. And so we want to study what sorts of use mixing may be like safe or appropriate. As I mentioned, the city also has a pretty extensive portfolio of industrial. However, it's unclear kind of the extent to which some practices are actually utilized. And so the Department of Citywide Administrative Services is exploring some changes that can help diagnose these space needs and allocate things more efficiently. The third goal is to explore efficient freight movement. So 96% of the city's freight moves by truck at the moment. This creates congestion issues, safety issues, particularly at a few key kind of bottlenecks around the city, mostly concentrated around the bridges. The growth of e-commerce and last mile distribution facilities that support fulfillment of e-commerce orders has really only exacerbated this issue. So in addition to identifying targeted infrastructure improvements that can enhance safety and efficiency along some of these key corridors, the city is also pursuing some measures to try to shift freight mode from trucks to rail, maritime, and micromobility as well. So I think folks here may be familiar with the Blue Highways Initiative that EDC is pursuing. Right, they're in the process of identifying and activating these maritime landings around the city that will enable things to be moved off of boats and onto micromobility, microcargo. There's 3 sites in Manhattan, 1 in the Bronx, and a few other sites under consideration around the city. They're also working with us here at City Planning to understand how zoning can help preserve space along industrial waterfronts to enable future expansion of a maritime freight network. EDC also manages several city-owned freight rail assets around the city, including the freight rail lift bridge that's just west of Common Hook out in Staten Island. And they're exploring potential investments that could enhance the capacity of some of these assets. New York Atlantic, who is the organization that operates all the freight rail in and around New York City, has set a goal of expanding its overall freight tonnage 25-30% over the course of the next decade. So I think the city's figuring out how they can use objectives of that sort. Last year, the Department of Transportation actually adopted new rules that legalize the use of some of these micro-mobility cargo vehicles. And DOT is also in the process of identifying locations throughout the city where they can build out these curbside micro-mobility logistics hubs that can hopefully support the proliferation of some of this micro-mobility for cargo. So the Department of Transportation also manages truck route network, which basically identifies where trucks are allowed to operate and where they're not allowed to operate. They periodically update that in response to changing traffic patterns, changing land use patterns, and the like. They're in the process of finalizing some of those changes to the truck route network. We anticipate that implementing those, as well as a few corresponding projects over the course of the coming years. Last year, the Department of Transportation also announced that they are piloting a program that would allow overnight truck parking in certain industrial areas to prevent trucks from illegally parking in residential neighborhoods, which has been a persistent and growing problem in some of these parts of the city that have a lot of truck-intensive warehouse operations. They're exploring the possibility of expanding that pilot to all of the primary industrial areas outlined on the map a few slides back. And then lastly, the city is exploring a few measures that can help decarbonize existing truck fleets. While load share is a goal that we should aim towards, the fact of the matter is that our infrastructure is just set up for most of our freight to move by truck. And so aiming to decarbonize those trucks should also be a part of kind of creating a more sustainable freight network. There's a program called the Clean Trucks Program that was created once point, I believe back in 2021, that has since been expanded citywide, which basically provides a rebate for truck fleet owners if they a diesel vehicle with an electric vehicle or what have you. And so it's been pretty successful since the expansion. They're exploring some measures that can help increase participation citywide. And then lastly, DOT is exploring some potential changes that could enable the construction of curbside electric vehicle, electric truck charging infrastructure along some of these industrial corridors. Ideally, citing some of that overnight truck parking locations, but still very early stages of assessment.
Matt, CBC.
Yeah, apologies. The fourth goal is promote clean and safe industrial areas. So industrial areas are perceived, is warranted. Industrial areas are perceived kind of dirty, hazardous areas that are wrought with illegal dumping, illegal parking and loading, insufficient public infrastructure, and other quality of life issues. Some of these challenges are actually a product of the fact that we have this outdated industrial building stock, right? If the loading dock in an old industrial building is too small to accommodate large modern trucks, that truck is going to stick out into the middle of the road and create a hazard for everyone else who's trying to use that street. So there is potentially a land use development solution here. But some of this can be addressed through investment in public infrastructure and just better management of the public realm. In talking to industrial businesses over the course of the planning process, we found that not only are these cleanliness and safety issues like challenging for workers who have to commute into these places and out of these places every day and residents who live nearby, but they're actually obstructing the efficiency of industrial business operations and costing these people things that affect the bottom line as well. So developing industrial area design toolkits. So a lot of zoning districts across the city have design standards, right, that require things like street trees. They standardize sidewalk widths, curb cut widths, and things of that nature. Most of those regulations are absent or are pretty insufficient in manufacturing districts. There's good reason to have all of those design standards present in manufacturing districts, right? trucks could strike street trees, making kind of their planting in the first place, potentially, a waste of money. So the Department of City Planning is exploring what sorts of design standards may be appropriate to try to kind of benefit these industrial realms. Again, well, not bring them to alignment with commercial or residential districts exactly. Secondly, enhance the industrial public realm. One of the tried and true strategies for bringing about cleaner and safer business districts in a commercial context is to have a merchants association or a business improvement district help provide supplemental sanitation services and the like. We think that it may make sense to explore potential partnerships with community-based organizations like that to provide similar services in the context of an industrial district as well. And then lastly, improve environmental protection in industrial areas. So the zoning resolution includes these things called performance standards, which basically say what sorts of uses have to be enclosed within buildings, and what measures do you have to take to control like emissions or noise associated with a given use. Most of those performance standards were also adopted in the early 1960s, which is prior to the enactment of the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts, and so they are long overdue updating as well. Our last goal was to prepare industrial areas for climate threats. So about half of all industrially zoned land in New York City is within that 1% annual chance floodplain. The figure is even higher for our heaviest industrial areas, 2 and 3 districts. About 75% of 2 and 3 districts are within those geographies. And so this not only presents really significant risks to those thousands of jobs and businesses within those flood geographies, but also to public communities nearby, right? Flood events, inundates a business, materials on that site, that's a problem that affects everyone else. So preparedness in industrial areas matters for really everyone else as well. Also, industrial areas are on average about 8 degrees hotter than the city on a random hot summer day, predominantly due to this thing called the urban heat island effect. So significant amounts of blacktop, plus lots of trucks idling, and generators, emitting and whatnot, and lack of vegetation is a recipe for the heating up of the industrial public realm. So that's something we're trying to address as well. So a few recommendations. One is to promote better stormwater management within the industrial public realm. Throughout the city, the Department of Environmental Protection builds and operates and maintains green infrastructure. However, as I mentioned, green infrastructure doesn't always make sense in industrial areas because debris can clog the drainage function that they typically offer, or again, trucks can run through and damage that green infrastructure. There's an alternative form of green infrastructure, filtration basins, which basically takes the drainage benefits of planting and moves it underground almost to try to prevent some of that truck damage or debris laying clogging. But DEP is currently figuring out the extent to which this may be deployable in areas. Secondly, enhancing industrial operations flood resiliency. The city recently piloted what are known as climate resilient design guidelines. This essentially are design standards that help ensure that critical infrastructure and city facilities are sufficiently, considerate of and designed to mitigate flood risks. I believe that they're planning to expand the applicability of those climate design regulations. Lastly, so Department of City Planning is exploring potential changes to some of our street tree planting rules, which don't apply to industrial projects or in industrial areas for the most part, again, for the reasons that I mentioned. And so trying to figure out if there's a way to configure street tree planting regulations that kind of balances some of these issues around damage from truck strikes, while also trying to introduce some much needed vegetation and tree canopy in our industrial areas. So that is my presentation. Trying to get through a 170-page plan in the space of 30 minutes. So apologies if I was moving a little bit fast. Free to answer any questions or go back and talk about anything in greater detail as folks would like.
Okay, we'll start out with a few questions. I know the mayor has one as well. But just could you let us know at this point how we can still engage with this as the community board? You talked about doing outreach to Community Board 7, and if you could let us know, or outreach in Community Board 7, if you could just let us know. It's sort of like, what did outreach look like, and then what can we do now, just as we start talking through the rest of the conversation.
Sure. So those were walking tours with different industrial business stakeholders within community boards, not direct outreach to community boards. So apologies if I messed up there. One of those was a tour of the marine terminal and industry city. One which I was walking tour of some of the assets to the south, the street rail yard.
Then at this point, how can we engage as a community board on this plan? Just so as our questions come in, we can kind of.
Sure. So the industrial plan does not include any details on implementation. You know, when we started this plan, we did not anticipate it being released at the end of the lame duck administration. And so we really clearly articulate next steps for that reason. The new administration is still onboarding city planning leadership. Really have a clear sense of what the next steps will be from our new leadership. What I can say, city planning under local law 172 is required to issue these implementation updates every 2 years. So the industrial plan will be redone in 8 years. It's now part of kind of a series of plans that the city does on a routine basis. And so we are required to monitor progress towards implementation on all of these fronts. And report out to the public on that status. That's as much as I can say about what we're going to do with the plan moving forward. But if these recommendations are moved forward with in a way that impacts the community board, we'll be back up here to talk about them.
Okay, so it's a plan, it's a statement of objectives, principles, values, but it doesn't beyond that have any teeth or budget.
Correct.
Behind it. Okay. And then maybe you could just answer this very basic question of taking myself out of the role I have, but just, why industrial in New York? If you could just sort of like devil's advocate, like why do we want more industrial and what kind of industrial are we talking about?
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, industrial constitutes about 50% of the city's job base, which is not a substantial portion of our economy. We've also found that those jobs are disproportionately accessible to folks without a college degree, and they have generally better wages than all. So it's not just the number of jobs, but also the quality of jobs. They also provide really essential services, right? The backbone of how this city, maintains itself, runs through our industrial businesses. And so they provide a service that almost like transcends how they show up in economic data as well. That's why we believe they're worth preserving and expanding.
Any opinions about what kind of industrial we're trying to here?
We did not include recommendations on particular like sectors we sought to grow, but there are opportunities and things with the green economy that we discussed.
Sorry, my head is spinning.
Yeah.
I'm happy. Any questions? I'm going to ping you off of what Catherine had. I know, Jeremy, you have some questions. Would you like to go now?
Sure. So I noted before that the map of the truck routes didn't show CD7. I will say that what I'm aware of the truck route study is DOT is proposing one additional truck route, not removing any truck routes from the community, but adding Second Avenue as a truck route. So I would posit that we're not expecting, at least DOT is not expecting a reduction in truck trips locally if we're increasing lane miles for trucks to use locally. Can you explain what role the Community Board's 197A plan played in the development of this project?
Sure. So we reviewed tons of plans that spoke to different issues in the city's industrial economy. As I mentioned, there was not much like localized planning planning area profiles that we developed, which did some localized job land use and other analysis, and then trying to broad recommendations for the direction that we think the industrial economy and that locale could be headed, and city policies that we think could be supportive of that direction. In the process of developing the strategic planning area profile for South of Brooklyn strategic planning area, includes residents down to Bay Ridge as well. We looked through all of the planning documents, including the ones in the plan.
Thank you. I want to make sure it's being used because I'm not sure previous administrations referred to it. I hope the current administration will. I was happy to hear that the current administration wants to keep the manufacturing area for manufacturing. However, the Department of Homeless Services has proposed a new homeless shelter on 45th Street, west of Bush Terminal Park, somewhere between 1st and 4th Avenues. 3/4 of that is our industrial area. Is the current administration's policy not to allow homeless shelters within the manufacturing zone?
I can speak to any policies. The industrial plan reflects the work of the last administration. And so, yeah, we already fully staffed up, yet alone having developed like a sound.
So let me say this, we received that information from DHS during the last administration, but you're saying the last administration's policy was not to allow homeless shelters there.
The zoning regulation only allows homeless shelters in manufacturing districts under very specific circumstances. And so presumably, again, I can speak to that project, but presumably that project, follow the zoning resolution regulations where this can be cited. But again, can't speak to the project or, policy more broadly.
I wouldn't make that presumption. I didn't hear the word enforcement whatsoever. We talked about the perception, I think more than the perception of a filthy industrial area, lots of graffiti, lots of illegal dumping. Any action with regard to increased enforcement in those areas?
Our understanding is that through implementing the changes to the truck route network, there are some enforcement measures that are supposed to be a part of that, and I can speak to what the transportation is thinking there. But in terms of other agency enforcement, considering around the public realm is an agency task force that tries to work on these issues. Presumably that would yield some enhanced enforcement from more of the involved agencies.
I would say some of these agencies are complicit in the filthiness of the area when they don't hold their own contractors to account for keeping those areas clean. I'm done with my questions of metric.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. It's good to have your historical record too and all the questions that you can ask so we can be on the record. We're going to go to folks in the room after John asks his question, and then we'll go virtually. So, and we'll start with committee members first, and then in the room, just in the room from the public who will also take questions.
All right, thank you. So this kind of piggybacks on what Jeremy was saying about the 197A plan. So in our industrial zone, the 1961 regulations, like you mentioned, really tried to make an effort to make a lot more of this community industrial, right? It was concerned that if we were losing manufacturing jobs, we had to make more areas for manufacturing and kind of to get people out. I've even seen like documents from your agency saying that, if we zone this industrial, people will just leave. And then that didn't really happen, although some people did, and there were a lot of unscrupulous people burning things out. And out of that came the whole M1 2D zone, right, that we have, which is designed to allow kind of mixed use manufacturing and residential. Now, I know you talked in the discussion about how what do they call it, neighborhood manufacturing? Yeah, so I think that following up on Jeremy's point about the 197A, you need to keep that in mind. There are still a lot of those, and if you're looking for places to study, there are ones where we see an industrial business on the ground floor and then a house on top.
Yeah.
This is especially important for us because the way things are mixing seems to be, increasing, right? Like, so 3rd Avenue became very industrially focused. We had a lot of car repair things, and now it's like Industry City, which you mentioned has, both industrial businesses commercial businesses and office businesses becoming very different in certain ways on that strip. So looking at this, I mean, I would urge you to consider that in the 197A plan, it does talk about the importance of preserving housing west of Third Avenue. And I would say that, especially given that the modern sites that you talked about, a lot of them, correct me if I'm wrong, require more space than the parcels are typically available there, that maybe some of this mixed use should be more considered, and maybe not just with manufacturing and residential in those areas, but perhaps manufacturing, residential, commercial, or perhaps even other types of uses, or even maybe more housing. Like I know I've heard the mayor talk about how we could have a sanitation garage with a high rise on top of it. I mean, not that I'm proposing a high rise, but that we have new opportunities for the new mayor. We can keep these goals that we've had in mind for the 197A, but also look at some of these things and consider that, because some of our spaces are not really, you can't build huge warehouses like in Mascot or somewhere like this. So,
We appreciate that.
You agree with me?
We appreciate the community board has long been aware of some of these issues around the relationship between industrial and residential, and has supported in theory, and what I'm hearing, for some degree of mixing where appropriate for the sake of preserving residential in some places, for the sake of preserving industrial and others, right?
yeah, and maybe even, given the issues you said about cleanliness and quality of life, maybe, having industrial and residential close together and more supported can help with some of that stuff people complain,
Yeah, I didn't mention this in the presentation, but that there are about, I think, almost 200,000 units of housing in manufacturing districts across the city. Largely, they end up in manufacturing districts because the city thought if they just mapped out all these places, these people would leave. And so it's led to these pretty significant clusters of housing in zones across the city. And when you own a house in an M zone, your experience personally, but your ability to renovate that house, or even like get like to refinance the mortgage on that house, like it's kind of. But so one of the recommendations that we also included in the plan that I didn't mention was to try to identify some of these clusters of mostly green and existing residential that exist in zones across the city, and consider what measures we can take to enable those homeowners. Again,
And try to jump in on this too. And just to piggyback on that, John. Oh, yeah. I believe I was here for City After Housing Opportunity, and we spoke a little bit about the M1, the housing in the M1D districts, and most of it was by authorization for new housing, but there was a slightly more permissive blocks where there's more residential. This is a reminder to myself to dig up that information to send it to you, because I think it's what you were talking about, but just as a sort of comment on the preservation of housing to the west of, or actually also really to the east of there, but also some information on that, but great reminder, I think.
Okay, we have a mic, we can do hands if there's community members questions. I can carry question, but otherwise I can see that.
No, my voice was high.
Okay, so I'll go to Matt. Jerry, could you help with that mic?
Even my.
There's another agenda item, so there's chips, brought chips. That was salsa. Great, but next meeting you bring the salsa. And I'll chips again.
You know what? I'll go ask my question.
The mic either way, can we?
Quick anyway, that tool that you shared out earlier.
Yeah.
With the map of, all that industrial data, is that a snapshot or is that, live?
It's yeah, we might have with future analysis of the data that we use on board.
Oh, okay. So, great presentation. I learned something. But I also learned that, that you need to talk about why some of the industry left New York City, right? I remember I look at the map of Manhattan. I remember when I was a kid, Manhattan was full of manufacturing, clothing, so on, so on, so on. And then got very expensive. So they moved to Brooklyn, right? So my family job got moved to Brooklyn. And then that got expensive. And then job got moved overseas because it was cheaper. Right? Have you guys studied why, right? Manufacturing leave New York, right, and go overseas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with like federal policy, you know, and then for industrial to push the camp from cities to suburbs and the Sun Belt, and then like later on to other countries. So that's trade policy, right? And then enables those manufacturers to move their operations for abroad and whatnot. So things include the construction of the federal highway system after the Second World War. That basically was like, why would I rely on?
I wasn't born back then.
No, I know, but like these bills are like a series of local, state, and federal policy decisions that were made over the latter half.
So I want to share, because this is a topic that I've been talking to my parents, others about. Why do they leave? Why they go somewhere else? Why do my friend all the manufacturers overseas? Union killed it. Union killed it. Okay. So how do we encourage them to come back to New York? Right. And New York is a union. But how do we encourage them to come back to New York and manufacture there and sell overseas so they don't have to pay for it? It's still cheaper than being there. Thank you.
Yeah. And can't speak to the labor policy side of things, but I think that, yes, some of the land use policy changes that we were exploring in this plan, and some of the changes to the industrial map really see brain, you know, back into the industrial business here. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Yeah.
So we have, questions from committee members, I think, virtually. That is your hand. And then we do have another agenda item, so I'll just say we'll do another 7 minutes of questions on this one, so we go to the next one.
Jeremy Kaplan, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes.
okay. Hi. I would like to say that I think it's really important to put out the the narrative around building more housing in the industrial waterfront is actually a really bad idea, and that's exactly what has kept the industrial waterfront the way that it is. Um, so I think when you look at basically why the industrial business zone has been eroding, it's because of rezonings and putting housing and mixed use housing into industrial business zones. And that's why Sunset Park has actually maintained the industrial business zone that we have, because we've been very strict with having it as M1 manufacturing and have left it as an industrial business zone. We cannot turn into another Williamsburg where they totally eroded the industrial business zone and you build housing. Everybody knows in real estate that residential and office and commercial will make more money than manufacturing. So the fact is that once you start diluting the industrial business zone, that's not coming back. And it makes it harder to find those spaces to build industrial manufacturing. So I think it's really key, because I heard some people talking about building like luxury high rises on top of waste plants and stuff. You can't do that. That doesn't happen. First of all, people don't want that in their luxury housing. They're not going to take a waste manufacturing plant in their luxury housing. That just doesn't work. There's a reason why this zoning has existed for decades upon decades. And so I think it's really important to push back on this notion that we should be slowly creeping, because we've seen in Gowanus what happens when you erode that industrial waterfront. And now Gowanus is gone. And I think also we need to talk about how EDC has been undermining the industrial waterfront in Brooklyn Marine Terminal, where you're eroding 50% of the Green Highway and the port that's there at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal in Red Hook. And that's super important. So there's contradictory things going on here. And if we care about the really industrial waterfront and a working waterfront, we don't talk about diluting industrial manufacturing spaces, and we talk about actually keeping ports as ports and not putting 5,000 units of housing, which is what the EDC is doing with the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. So I think we just need to make those statements very clear because on a principle as a board, and from the 197A plan, it's been about protecting our industrial waterfront. And so we need to be very careful about saying that, mixed use stuff is great and that could be very beneficial when all we've seen the history of losing industrial manufacturing zones is the slow encroachment, eroding industrial business zones and eroding M1 to make it commercial, to make it housing. And also at the end of the day, we hear all the time of complaints of people on residential streets that are mixed with manufacturing about quality of life. And that's one of the reasons why there's been a separation. And so it's really interesting that we're trying to promote more of that when we constantly as a board hear people complaining about, oh, the trucks here, this here, that here. There's a reason why there's a separation of industrial manufacturing from residential. And that's it's quality of life issues. And it's also because we know we need these industrial spaces. So I think it's really important that we continue to discuss that and not buy into this mixed use of everything because that's the erosion of our industrial manufacturing spaces.
Yeah. I might just say like the industrial land use framework that I presented earlier continues this idea that there are places within our city that should be just for industrial uses only, right? That's what the primary industrial areas represent. There are certain industrial uses that absolutely completely sequestered from commercial activities, from residential activities, and then the like due to their intensity. But not all industrial uses have to be, cordoned off. And again, as technology is improving, I think there's evidence that some of these things can intermingle in a safe manner. There's a project called 805 Rockaway that was developed by the Greenpoint Manufacturing Design Center. That includes ground floor, industrial, and residences up top. And so I think there are places both in New York and around the country that are showing that mixing within reason and when it's appropriate, be done. We want to do more research around what that line exactly is. But we are very, very supportive of the idea that there are places that should be buying for industrial wholesale.
And I can just,
Yeah, please.
and if I could just add to what Andrew said, I think a really good example, specifically in Community Board 7, is the M31 district on the waterfront, which is the highest intensity manufacturing district we have in the city. There's no rezoning as any part of this plan, but also that tracks quite closely with primary industrial areas, which are designated for preservation of industrial use. So I think in this plan specific to Community Board 7, there is that recognition of that separation and the importance of that intensity of heavy uses.
Just to underline and bold and emphasize that this plan does not change any of the zoning. Its plan, its proposal does not actually have a 13 for building plus it or zoning changes. It doesn't change anything in our district. Okay, thank you.
We're working on potential future policy changes.
This doesn't propose changing for us in our district or something. Okay, thank you. And then there's committee member. Yeah. Okay.
Anything else that's stand up?
Okay. Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. I just wanted to thank Jeremy and Jeremy. And then Kathleen. Yeah, I thought that was very good.
Okay, maybe I'm gonna go to another question.
Maria Roca, you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Someone else might have spoken to this before, but the sound has been really it's been very, very difficult to follow the speaker, for whatever technical reasons there is. But the site where the peaker plants are, that entire area going up to crossing Fourth Avenue, all the way up to crossing Fourth Avenue, all those basements flood, have been doing so for decades. And so thinking of building anything, uh, never mind residential, anything on that land once the plants are gone, it's a, I don't know who thought about that as even a possibility. That land should be given back to the water. It is not a feasible plan to put anything there. The entire, in the 20s up to the 30s, and now it's creeping into the 40s. All of that, all those basements flood, as I said before. Anything commercial can be built. You can build 1 story up, 2 story up, depending on how far into the future the planning goes. But there should not be any residential whatsoever. At this point, even propose west of Third Avenue, anywhere along the Sunset Park waterfront. We've talked about this ad nauseum. I cannot comprehend how some people are still thinking of residential, whether it be usual residential or hotels, anywhere where people are going to sleep. It's bad enough for the people who are stuck there, and they should be bought out and brought up the hill. It is not feasible. It doesn't make economic sense. It is not good planning on any level. So I just wanted to put out there that, and I support what Jeremy mentioned about the separation of residential and commercial, industrial in the planning mindset. But be west of Third Avenue, no one should be thinking about residential or hotels or anywhere you're going to have to rescue people in a water related emergency. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Maria, and maybe what I'll just say as an opportunity, I think we have strong opinions, views, and perspectives of what we want to see for the working waterfront. And I think could I propose that the Economic Development Business Committee and Transportation, we can receive your additional comments. We could share, we could just share, kind of compile all this and share a letter to follow up with ECP on the values, right? The 197A plan is very clear about a walk to work. It's very clear about the zoning, and we can just use this as like a restatement of the values because I think we will probably have many other perspectives of people who want to share, their view on Community Board 7. So maybe can I ask, since we have another agenda item, is there any other questions that are in the room? Questions? And again, if it's a statement of values, we encourage you to send an email to the community board email so that we can capture it later. Okay, so for questions from any board members, Faye and then Jamie. And maybe we'll do it like back to back. So you ask your question and that for the other 2 that are in the room.
Thank you. I want, without getting into like the very granular nitty gritty, what is the general vision for outdoor industrial sites? So you talked about like decarbonization of the fleet. That speaks to it a little bit, but like the environmental factors feel a little bit different. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mentioned this briefly in the presentation, but there are performance standards and enclosure rules that govern whether your operation has to be inside or not, or how you like insulate against any sort of noise or noxiousness in the zoning resolution. One of the things that we'd like to do, or the implementation of this plan, would be to review and update those standards to kind of prevent noise and nuisance from impacting nearby residences. The Department of Environmental Protection is also exploring, as mentioned, plan called the indirect source rule that will establish a series of air monitoring, equipment around the city and industrial areas in particular, and identify any kind of problematic action or.
So our Sunset Park working waterfront is slightly unique from some of the other New York City industrial districts in that it's a sort of high pass-through area for hospital employees, commuters using the ferry station, potential future IDX employees or commuters, and also industry city commerce goers, which means there's lots of people on bike, but on sort of multimodal transit. And the industrial zoning causes multiple truck routes, pedestrian fatalities, and these car mechanics that use the sidewalks with their parking lots. So I'm just wondering what we'll do to sort of protect multimodal street users, specifically in the Sunset Park corridor.
Sure. But one of my recommendations speaks to updating the street design manual to try to be considerate of freight movement, right, and truck traffic, and how like strategies for streets can be designed in a way that accommodates multimodal transportation users and all the same.
We'll try and use the roving mic. Jerry, do you mind trying to pass this? And if you could ask your question and pass to the next person, and then we'll just have DCP answer both, and then we'll go to the next agenda.
Presentation included jobs data. What is the source of the data? How often is it updated? How can you get access to it?
Sure. So the source is the longitudinal employer household survey. It's a survey that the U.S. Census Bureau puts out periodically. That basically makes workers like home destinations and work destinations. I believe that the year that we used for the data explorer was from 2023. There's a couple year lag on the LEHD data. You can access some counts through our explorer, right? Click on any given block anywhere in the city. It will tell you how many of those different types of jobs are. I don't believe we have the underlying LEHD data available to download, but it's an available data source. We'd be happy to answer any questions on how we used it or how you used it as well.
Okay, so we're out of a mic, so no. Okay, so if you want to share any reflections or questions from tonight's presentation, please send K07 at cb.nyc.gov. That's the community board email. Jeremy or a team member will get it, and it'll be really helpful as the committee reflects on sharing again statement of values by way of things like plan in response to this industrial plan. So thank you so much for such a thorough presentation, and we'll share the slides also with our full committee and board members. Thank you so much. Great. Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome up two presenters. And so just to tee this up, from Uproots, talking about the grade 2.0 special purpose district, you're welcome to come to the front. You can introduce yourself when you open, and just to say by way of Julio Pena, who's the chairperson, realize that this meeting tonight is a good opportunity to have a first present on the special purpose district and grade 2.0. And you, thanks
so much. Incredibly quick. You all are trying to. But this actually feeds into the last presentation we just had, which is about citywide processes that are being speedrun that left communities behind, right? This process, Uprose attempted to engage with the industrial plan last year. We sent a letter in April that they said they got and they never got, right? This is kind of a wider process where we're seeing community input being sidelined and frontline leadership being sidelined as well. And the preference for developers to kind of now come in, being able to speculate on the state of these new lucrative frameworks that kind of advise how land use can look like here in Sunset Park. And it's not just the industrial one, it's also Batworks and other things that are happening here on our industrial waterfront, where we're having outsiders come in for a $100 million price tag to
we retrofit AppWorks into now a co-working space. And so when we talk about our industrial waterfront, we talk about other uses other than manufacturing being populated on our waterfront. This is exactly what's happening. We have a WeWork style facility now coming to our industrial waterfront that will raise the rents and prices of folks who live here in Sunset Park. And so that's exactly why we're here to talk about the special purpose district and our work here at Outpost with the Grid 2.0. This is a plan that was born out of almost 12 years of community engagement to decarbonize Sunset Park. And so this is what it looks like. I'm going to sit down at a table and talk about what we want the future to look like. Outsider developers who are coming here with a $100 million price tag to cement themselves as the decision maker in your community. And so what we're doing now is really beginning the process of implementing a special purpose. So when you hear all this zoning kind of jargon, right? What a special purpose district is really kind of manipulating the land use conditions. And so when you think about Bay Ridge, they have a really kind of distinct aesthetic to the building, right? And so that's the special purpose district. They have a special purpose district to preserve the working class character and kind of aesthetic of the buildings in Bay Ridge. We're hoping to create a special purpose district here in Sunset Park, but for very different reasons. That's to really reclaim our land here in Sunset Park, to really rethink how land can be used here. How can we generate community wealth for Sunset Park residents? How do we really rethink what our industrial waterfront can look like in the face of extreme climate threats? I think Maria framed it perfectly. Those sites where the peaker plants are at right now will likely be underwater in the next couple of years. So how are we preparing for this future? How are we thinking about the future for our kids? How do we think about a future that we are driving and not outsiders who are coming here with economic opportunity? And so I encourage you all, we have some flyers outside. Please feel free to sign our petition. We're also on 36th Street. If you have any questions, you can stop by and tell me this. We would love you. We'd love to chat with you and share more about our work here. And the last thing I'd like to share, February 21st at the Outpost office, we also have a meeting to talk about other changes that we can have here in Sunset Park, and specifically around the peaker plants. And what do we think the future without those peaker plants can look like? So we're thinking about this kind of climate forward future here in Sunset Park that is driven by the residents and not outsiders. And so hope you all can join us. Thank you.
Thank you. Ahmad, do you want to talk us through what the special purpose district is and Grid 2.0 for folks that haven't heard about it before?
Absolutely. Yeah, so the Grid 2.0 again is a plan that was born out of almost a decade of community engagement. Essentially, this is the plan to decarbonize Sunset Park. So there are elements such as community wealth generation, thinking about renewable energy deployment across Sunset Park. One of the things Upward was part of, and I think some of you may know about, is Sunset Park Solar. So this is a project that is now on the rooftop of the Brooklyn Harbor Terminal that we just finished construction on last year. We're actually hoping to go live in the next couple of weeks. But this is a project that will be delivering 25% discounts to folks who are subscribed off their clients and utility bill. It is that kind of example that we hope to see scale and deployed throughout Sunset Park. It's reimagining how we use our industrial space in Sunset Park for the better, to foster a just transition, to think about green jobs, and not just green jobs that are, the workforce development cash cow that we're seeing now, but real long-term sustaining family jobs for folks here in Sunset Park. So the Grid 2.0 Special Purpose District is a zoning overlay that's composed of 4 sub-areas: a green transportation corridor that would be on the Blue Highway activation sites here on Sunset Park from 23rd to 29th Street. There's also the heavy manufacturing area, which would be our industrial waterfront. There's also other areas as well in the plan, but this is a comprehensive plan that really just reimagines what Sunset Park could look like in the face of extreme climate threats, in the face of economic insecurity, in the face of the moment we're in right now, right? And so this is something that I'd love to engage with you all more on. Please feel free to come to our office if you have any questions, but this is a process that we're hoping to kind of really pick up a lot more this year, and hopefully come back to you all with a lot more updates. But we hope that if there's one takeaway that you all have from this, is that this is what's possible when communities lead, right? For us to have so many questions from the last presentation, and again, figures that weren't even seen, that should not be the reality we're in right now, right? We should be the deciders of our future. We should have significant input over what our community looks like. So this is us reclaiming our power.
I just have a few more questions about the special purpose district. So this the organization is proposing just what, what is it? What are examples of it? What are the, is it something that is zoning change? Just anything that's more specifics that you could offer?
It's not specifically zoning changes, but it's kind of just classifying the specific uses that would be allowed in some of these areas. So for example, we envision a green transportation corridor, right, that would really tie into the local small businesses in the area and tie into the highway activation. So it's kind of reimagining really how we use our land here in Sunset Park now, and more so tying into a just transition. So it's not at all rezoning the areas, but just more tying it into a unified just transition effort here in Sunset Park. The creation of a green economy that is really just.
Are there any questions from anyone else that's here, either the other chairs or okay, nothing from anyone up here. Is there any questions from members?
Jeremy Kaplan.
Okay, Jeremy is a committee member, so I'll go to him first, and I'll go back to you.
Sorry. I have to give you questions. Jeremy Kaplan, you can unmute.
Yeah. I had a question about how does the sort of Grid 2.0 and the special purpose district look at existing sort of manufacturing on the waterfront that might not fit into the sort of green idea? I'm especially thinking about some of the maybe like the food, a lot of like manufacturing of food, the wholesalers and stuff that we have down there. Like what how does overlaying sort of the special purpose district, what does that do for these businesses, and like what does it say? How do they interact with it? And that's what I'm curious about because I know that the grid isn't opposed to those businesses, but what necessarily does it do? Does it sort of start to require people to look at their business practices and in an ecological way? Or, I mean, I know zoning can't really do that, but I'm just curious, like how it interacts with those businesses that don't necessarily fit into like an ecological, sort of green, business standard.
Yeah, I love these questions, and I think this is the stuff that we both go into detail with folks too. But what we're hoping for here is to kind of build a regenerative local economy that is like tying into workforce training, cooperative business models. And so to your point about pre-existing businesses here in the area that might not necessarily align with some of the sub areas that are being correlated, our hope is that we incentivize behaviors that are helping Sunset Park transition to a climate prepared future, right? We're thinking about how our waterfront right now can literally be flooded and how Maria was just sharing the folks who are living on the streets adjacent to the bigger power plants and some of the other areas too that are really predisposed to some of these extreme climate risks. And so we're thinking about the local economy, supporting these businesses, not leaving them behind, right, and trying to catch up. And so they're at the forefront of this process, and the folks that we've been engaging now throughout the development of the group, thinking about climate adaptation needs as well. But this is a conversation, to your point, that is not happening in silo without these community members and businesses for us to have a table.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go to in the room. I think there's just one hand that was up. Yeah. So, Sean.
Can you explain how UPROS does its work to develop these plans? When UPROS talks about the grid 1.0 and 2.0, so these are two different plans that have been out now for years, UPROS always refers to them as community led. And my understanding is you're saying what the city is doing is not community led, but UPROS is community led. Is that correct? And if so, what is the process that UPROS uses that you believe the city does not use? Love that question so much. I just want to say that. So I think what really differentiates UPROS model from what we're seeing city institutions right now continue to use over and over again is consulting community leadership after decisions have been made instead of having community at the table before the discussions began in the first place. And so what we did with the grid 0.0, the grid 1.0, the grid 2.0, this has been an evolving comprehensive plan to
rather than Sunset Park that began with Sunset Park residents talking about what they wanted years before anything was even put on paper. There were folks in Sunset Park talking about the Greenway and other opportunities here in Sunset Park well before any of these things were put on paper. And so what we have done really is try to facilitate the honoring of community leadership, community knowledge, and facilitating the development of that. And so what city institutions now are doing, which is entirely opposite of honoring community leadership, is instead helicoptering in outside institutions to cement themselves as the decision maker, already signed contracts and lease agreements that consult community members about what they think. And so that is just completely an alternative to what we have proposed here, which is a community-led, a community-driven model that is formed by the needs and aspirations of Sunset Park residents, not businesses who want a paycheck.
With that, I'm going to towards public comment, but I think Ahmad, if you're going to be here, you can hang out for half a second just because we're like close to hitting 8 o'clock. So thank you so much for your presentation. And you said if people want details on special purpose, there's in that.
We have a petition for folks here if y'all want to sign it outside. And we also have enough on the 21st if you want to join us for some of these discussions too. But I just want to thank you all for sticking around for this. There's a lot of information today, but just appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm going to go to any additional public comment on behalf of either the two committees. Before I do that, I just have a couple just to say that for transportation, we are going to, quick, we had done one round of engagement for Third Avenue business engagement for the Third Avenue safety design proposal that was happening. It's meant to happen in 24 for implementation. We did a walkthrough in October. We're going to start planning those again for the spring. So the message is, if you are a transportation committee member, if you are any board member, and would like to do engagement along Third Avenue to sort of get the word out about the street improvement plan that was supposed to be implemented. And we're going to start again in March as soon as the weather gets good. We put together awesome slides of what we found in the first round, and we're going to include that as part of the reporting out in the full February board meeting. So there'll be an appendix with some of the awesome results. We're going to be tracking this over time. So stay tuned. You'll see that those are going to be walkthroughs on Third Avenue to do more business engagement. The other thing is that we have a letter that's going out to the head of DOT, Mike Flynn, about the delay of Third Avenue. It's like ready and authored, and it's just going to get sent out. So we'll also share that with everybody. The other in the future is we had sent out a call that the portion of the Greenway that has been built out from Hamilton Avenue to 29th Street. It's like they're just finishing things up. We sent a note out to community organizations where they want to participate in some sort of event that marks the fact that that's open on Third Avenue. It's like, it's good to take time when things are new with infrastructure and acknowledging it. And so we got a very good response from lots of organizations who said yes. And so we'll have a planning call, but the idea is to do something in May, in which we'd really love to have everybody involved and to come to that. So again, that's for the portion of the Greenway that's already open from Hamilton to 29th, and they haven't yet started the construction for the portion that's from 29th down to the rest of the section. So those are my announcements from the Transportation Committee. I don't know if Maris has any announcements. Wanted to give time for public comment if you wanted to share something else. I don't have any announcements, but I do want to, tonight I heard you about having meetings more often this year. Yes, we're going to have meetings more often. Thank you. So we'll just go to public comment before I officially, since I think maybe it's just on, so you don't. And please take tips so I don't bring them home. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Damaris. I will also be quick. My name is John from 23rd Street. So I just wanted to say I'm a former public member of the Economic Development Committee. I think these joint meetings are great and very constructive. I think it's incredibly important for the Economic Development Committee, as the mayor just said, to continue to meet regularly throughout 2026. My message to the community is simple. Decisions are being made, enormous consequential decisions that cost an enormous amount of money, hundreds of billions of dollars in public money, massive amounts of public land. Decisions are being made, whether or not the community has any say over those decisions. And in many cases, I think that matter when it comes to land use and economic development. The community is not being consulted, and the decisions are being made without this board and without the community. I'm gonna be brief. I just want to point out three things. Question to this board: who works at Brooklyn Army Terminal? What do they do? Has this board ever been given any data on that? The answer to my knowledge is no. EDC does periodic surveys. The methodology continues changing, and those surveys are never released to the public. I have the ones that I've gotten through FOIL requests. Why isn't this board told who works at the more than 4 million square foot publicly controlled Brooklyn Army Terminal? That's an example of a conversation the community is cut out of. The Made in New York campus. Again, I'm going to do 30 seconds on each one. The entire campus was renamed without the board, without the community. It was just renamed by the de Blasio administration. The Steiner Studios or Steiner Sequel Project was cited without the board, without the community. That same project, 900,000 square feet, is years behind schedule. There is no evidence that it is moving forward. EDC says it's still trying to make it happen. 4 of the 5 elected officials representing this community have never taken a position on whether that project will benefit. And the North Campus, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent. What are the businesses being cited there? Who works there? Who will work there? What information will be released to this community? And then you could keep going north, the SBMT project. There are so many other things to bring up. I don't want to hold you here, but there's a way to address this. There's a way for the community to be involved, is to be coming together in spaces like this, regularly meeting, discussing, collecting information, sharing information. If the community doesn't do that, the decisions will just be made. And many of those decisions will reshape this community for generations. The Steiner Sequel project alone was an option to essentially a 99-year lease for that project, starting on a 49-year lease. So I encourage this board and I encourage the community to come together on a regular basis to ask questions. And at the end of the day, if people in the community want these projects to happen, wonderful. It's up to you. It's up to the people who live here. But please make your voice heard and ask questions and demand more information for your sake, for your kids' sake, and for generations to come. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Councilor. With that, we will adjourn our meeting. Thanks, everybody.
I don't want that Ernie up there.
You're taking to upstate.
Oh, yeah.
So this one. This one. I did we didn't approve them.
Right.
No,
We don't have to approve or disapprove anything. They just have to inform us. We could choose to approve or disapprove anything, but we are not actually required.
Yeah. This is what I
Why they're available, that's why we share it with you and Cynthia.
Thank you. Yeah.